The monitor beeped steadily as another contraction hit, and I gripped my husband Daniel's hand, breathing through the pain. We'd been in the delivery room for 6 hours, and our daughter was finally ready to make her entrance into the world. Everything should have been perfect. The soft lighting we'd requested, the carefully chosen music playing quietly, Daniel whispering encouragement in my ear. Then the door burst open. "We're here." My mother-in-law Victoria swept in like a hurricane, her husband Robert trailing behind her with that perpetual scowl he'd worn since the day Daniel introduced me as his girlfriend 3 years ago. We couldn't let our first grandchild arrive without us present. The nurse immediately stepped forward. "I'm sorry, but only one support person is allowed." "Nonsense." Victoria's voice could have cut glass. "This is a family moment. We have every right to be here." She turned those cold gray eyes on me, the same eyes that had scrutinized every aspect of my life since I'd dared to marry her precious son. "After all, we need to make sure everything is legitimate." "Mom, please," Daniel said wearily. "Not now. Emma's in labor." "Oh, I'm perfectly aware of what Emma's doing," Victoria said, pulling out her phone to check her appearance in the camera. "Though the timing is rather suspicious, don't you think? Barely 9 months after the wedding? Some might say it's convenient." Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and I couldn't hold back a cry of pain. The doctor looked up from between my legs. "We're getting close. I need everyone except the father to leave now." "We're staying," Robert announced, speaking for the first time. His voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of a man who'd perfected corporate intimidation over 30 years of running his investment firm. "This child will carry the Montgomery name. We need to verify." "Verify what?" Daniel snapped, his patience finally breaking. For once, my gentle husband looked ready to physically throw his parents out. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her designer purse. "Well, darling, you know how these things can be. Especially with Emma's background. My background. The fact that I'd grown up in foster care, worked my way through college waiting tables, didn't have a trust fund or a family name that opened doors. In Victoria's world, that made me a gold digger at best, something worse at worst. One more push, the doctor called out, and suddenly nothing else mattered except bringing my daughter into the world. I bore down with everything I had, Daniel's hand in mine, and then, a cry. Perfect, loud, and absolutely beautiful. "Congratulations," the doctor said, placing the squirming bundle on my chest. "You have a healthy baby girl." I looked down at her through tears, tiny fingers, a shock of dark hair like Daniel's my nose. She was perfect. Daniel was crying too, touching her tiny hand with one finger like she might break. "She doesn't look like a Montgomery," Victoria said loudly. The room went silent except for our daughter's cries. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet despite the exhaustion. Victoria stepped closer, peering at my baby with theatrical skepticism. "I'm simply observing. The Montgomery genes are very strong. Daniel, his sister, his cousins, they all looked identical as babies. This child looks nothing like our family." "Mom, stop," Daniel warned. "I'm only saying what everyone's thinking," Robert added, moving to stand beside his wife. "The girl appears out of nowhere, claims to have no family, gets pregnant suspiciously quickly. Any reasonable person would have questions." The nurse holding my daughter looked uncomfortable. The doctor had quietly excused himself. Daniel's face was turning red with rage, but I put my hand on his arm. I was done. 3 years of subtle insults, of being treated like an interloper, of having my character questioned at every turn. "You want proof?" I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "You want to verify that this baby is really your grandchild?" "Well, if you're offering," Victoria said with a saccharine smile. "A simple DNA test would clear everything up, wouldn't it? Unless you have something to hide." "Order the tests," I said. "Right now. Today." Daniel looked at me in shock. "Emma, you don't have to." "No, they want proof? Let's give them proof. But here's my condition." I looked Victoria straight in the eye. "We test everyone. The baby, Daniel, me, and both of you." Victoria laughed, that tinkling fake laugh she used at charity galas. "Whatever for. We know who we are." "Humor me," I said. "You want to question my integrity? Then let's verify everyone's. Unless you have something to hide." I threw her own words back at her, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across Robert's face. Fear? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Fine," Victoria said, waving her hand dismissively. "Order your little tests. When they prove what we already know, that you've been lying to our son. You'll sign the divorce papers without contest and disappear. And when they prove this is Daniel's child? I countered. Then we'll acknowledge her as our granddaughter, Robert said stiffly, and apologize for our concerns. The nurse returned with the hospital's legal representative, who'd been summoned to handle what was becoming an increasingly tense situation. Within an hour, the tests were ordered, rush processing, results in 48 hours. The samples were taken from everyone, even Victoria and Robert, though they protested the indignity of it all. 2 days later, we were gathered in a conference room at the hospital. I'd insisted on a formal reading of the results, with the hospital administrator present as a witness. Victoria sat ramrod straight, her confidence radiating like perfume. Robert checked his phone obsessively. Daniel held our daughter, who was sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the drama surrounding her existence. Dr. Patricia Henley, the hospital's chief administrator, entered with a manila envelope. I have the results of the DNA testing as requested. I should note that these tests were conducted by 3 independent laboratories to ensure accuracy. Get on with it, Victoria said impatiently. Dr. Henley opened the envelope. First, regarding the paternity of baby girl Montgomery. The DNA analysis confirms with 99.97% certainty that Daniel Montgomery is the biological father of the child. I didn't even look at Victoria. I kept my eyes on Dr. Henley, waiting. Furthermore, she continued, maternal DNA confirms Emma Montgomery as the biological mother, which I assume was never in question, but was tested as requested. There, you see? Daniel said to his parents. Now you can apologize to my wife, and... There's more, Dr. Henley interrupted, her expression uncomfortable. As requested, we also ran comparative DNA analysis on all parties tested. The results are unexpected. The room went very still. The DNA test confirms that Daniel Montgomery shows no biological relationship to Robert and Victoria Montgomery. The probability of biological parentage is 0%. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's face had gone white, her perfectly applied makeup standing out starkly against her pallor. Robert's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the conference table. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. There must be a mistake. 3 independent labs, Dr. Henley reminded her gently. The results are conclusive. Daniel was staring at his parents, the people he'd called his parents his whole life, with a mixture of shock and growing anger. What is she saying? What does this mean? It means, I said quietly, that your parents have some explaining to do. This is ridiculous. Robert stood up, his chair scraping loudly. These tests are obviously flawed. We'll sue this hospital for. The conference room door opened, and an elderly woman walked in, followed by 2 police officers. She was probably 75, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that were achingly familiar. Daniel's eyes. Hello, Daniel, she said softly, tears streaming down her weathered face. My name is Margaret Sinclair. I'm your real grandmother. Victoria let out a sound like a wounded animal. Robert sat back down heavily, his face gray. Margaret continued, her voice stronger now. 31 years ago, my daughter Julia was a patient at Riverside Hospital's psychiatric ward. She'd been admitted for postpartum depression after giving birth to a baby boy. She was vulnerable, confused, heavily medicated. Her voice hardened as she looked at Victoria and Robert. The perfect victim for someone looking to steal a baby. You can't prove anything, Robert said, but his voice shook. Actually, I can, Margaret replied. You see, Victoria worked at Riverside Hospital as an administrator. She had access to all the patient files. She knew Julia had no family support. I was overseas, Julia's husband had left her. She knew no one would look for the baby if he disappeared. One of the police officers stepped forward. We've been investigating this case for 2 years, ever since Mrs. Sinclair came to us with her suspicions. The DNA test was the final piece of evidence we needed. Daniel was trembling, still holding our daughter. You're saying they kidnapped me? Your real name is Andrew Sinclair, Margaret said gently. Your mother, my Julia, never recovered from losing you. She spent 20 years searching before she took her own life. Her last words were about her stolen baby. I moved to Daniel's side, wrapping my arm around him as he processed this devastating truth. Our daughter stirred in his arms, making small cooing sounds. Why? Daniel asked his parents, the people who'd raised him. If you couldn't have children, why not adopt legally? Why steal someone else's baby? Victoria's careful composure finally cracked completely. We tried. For years, we tried everything. IVF, adoption agencies, but nothing worked. They said we were too old, or there were concerns about Robert's business dealings, or some other excuse. Then I saw her in the hospital, this young girl with no one, and she had this perfect baby boy, and I thought we could give him a better life. We had money, connections, stability. What did she have? She had a mother's love, Margaret said fiercely. She had family who would have helped if we'd known. She had the right to raise her own child. You destroyed her, I said to Victoria, my voice shaking with rage. You destroyed an innocent woman because you felt entitled to her baby. And then you had the audacity to question my integrity? To demand proof that I hadn't deceived your son. The second police officer spoke up. Victoria and Robert Montgomery, you're under arrest for kidnapping, identity fraud, and falsification of legal documents. As they read them their rights, Victoria kept babbling explanations, justifications, pleas for Daniel to understand. Robert said nothing, his corporate titan persona finally shattered. They were led away in handcuffs, and Daniel didn't even watch them go. Margaret approached slowly, respectfully. I know this is a shock. I don't expect anything from you, Daniel. Andrew, I'm sorry, I don't even know what to call you. Daniel, he said firmly. I've been Daniel for 31 years. But I want to know about her. About Julia. About my real mother. Margaret smiled through her tears and pulled out a worn photo album from her bag. She was beautiful. Kind. Talented. She was a pianist. You have her hands, her musical ability. She loved you so much in the short time she had with you. As Daniel looked through photos of the mother he never knew, our daughter, our perfectly legitimate daughter whose existence had exposed this 30-year lie, began to cry. Margaret looked at her with wonder. May I? She asked tentatively. I nodded, and Daniel carefully placed our daughter in her arms. His real grandmother's arms. What's her name? Margaret asked. Daniel and I exchanged glances. We'd been debating names for weeks, unable to decide. Julia, Daniel said suddenly. Her name is Julia Margaret Montgomery. Sinclair. If that's okay with you, Emma? I nodded, tears in my eyes. It's perfect. Margaret held baby Julia close, humming something, a lullaby maybe, something she might have hummed to Daniel if she'd had the chance. Your mother would be so proud, she whispered to Daniel. So proud of the man you've become, despite everything. The next months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and emotional adjustment. Victoria and Robert were eventually convicted, 15 years each for kidnapping and related charges. Their estate was liquidated to pay damages to Margaret and to fund a foundation for families of missing children. Daniel struggled with his identity for a while, but therapy helped, as did Margaret's patient presence in our lives. She never pushed, never demanded, just made herself available whenever Daniel was ready to learn more about his origins. She became the grandmother to Julia that Victoria never could have been, warm, genuine, and completely devoted. The extended Montgomery family, or whoever they really were, disappeared from our lives entirely, unable to face the scandal. But Daniel's real family began to emerge. Cousins Margaret had kept in touch with, elderly aunts who remembered Julia, a whole history that had been stolen from him. On Julia's first birthday, we held a party in the backyard of our new home. One bought with Daniel's inheritance from his real mother's estate, money that had been waiting for him all these years. Margaret played piano while Julia smashed cake in her high chair, and Daniel laughed, really laughed, for the first time since learning the truth. You know what the ironic part is? Daniel said that night as we put Julia to bed. Victoria was so obsessed with bloodlines, with family legacy, with genetic legitimacy. And in the end, she had none of it. No real claim to me, no biological grandchild until you gave her one, no authentic family at all. Just a 30-year lie. And now? I asked, watching our daughter sleep. Now I have everything real, he said, pulling me close. A wife who fought for the truth, a daughter who will always know exactly who she is and where she comes from, and a grandmother who never gave up hope of finding me. That's more than Victoria and Robert ever had, for all their money and status. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for Victoria's cruel demand in that delivery room. Her insistence on DNA testing didn't just prove my innocence. It exposed her guilt and gave Daniel back his true identity. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, even from the accusations of those who wish us harm. Baby Julia stirred in her sleep, and I touched her tiny hand. She would grow up knowing exactly who she was, surrounded by truth instead of lies, love instead of manipulation. The Montgomery name might not mean what it once did, but the Sinclair name, that meant survival, persistence, and the kind of love that searches for 30 years and never gives up. That was a legacy worth passing on.